Hi everyone. Now we're going to take a look at listening, and specifically active or effective listening. Now listening is one of those things that we think we know a lot about it, right? Everyone thinks that they're a good listener. But when we actually break it down and start to look at it in more complex ways, we see that really people aren't really good at listening, and that listening has a lot more layers. It's a lot more complex than we often first think. So listening is best described as the ability to accurately receive and interpret messages in the communication process. Now, listening is key to effective communication. Without the ability to listen effectively, our messages are easily misunderstood. And we've talked about messages and how we convey messages, how we encode and how we decode messages. Listening is key to effective communication when it comes to our ability to decode and understand messages. Listening is also important, just an important skill set to have. For instance, let's take a look at this quick video from Miss Teen USA a few years back.
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children.
Thank you very much, South Carolina.
Oh my gosh. Really? Now let's just say that maybe Miss Teen South Carolina is not a good listener, right? Let's just blame it on that. Let's just say that she is not a good listener and that somehow she misunderstood. She did not listen and hear the question correctly. Otherwise, we could have a week-long debate about the poor communication there in regards to answering that question. But what that clip does do is it highlights the importance and just how we communicate on a regular basis. So oftentimes when we think about listening and listening skills, we think about our ears, right? What we hear. There is a key distinction between what we hear or how we hear and how we listen. So we use more than just our ears to listen. In fact, we use our brain. We do use our ears. We use our eyes. What we see helps us more effectively understand what's going on around us. And then lastly, we use our heart to listen, right? So we use more than our ears. We do use our ears to actually hear, but we also listen with our eyes, with our brains, right? What our brain is telling us, and then what our experiences are telling us, and we also use our heart. Those are the four organs that we use to listen. So when we talk about effective listening, right, there is a difference again in hearing what someone says and in actually being an effective listener. So effective listening is when we actively absorb the information that's given to you from a speaker, right? We show that we are interested by providing feedback, both verbal feedback and nonverbal feedback. Think about being in a classroom and your teacher asks you a question, or your teacher is just doing a lecture. You show that you're interested by making good eye contact. You provide feedback, both verbal feedback, maybe as you ask questions, or maybe nonverbal feedback. You raise your hand, or you nod your head in approval, or you nod your head in disagreement, right? So we use all of these different facets of our nonverbal communication and our verbal communication to show that we are not only just hearing what a speaker is saying, but that we are actively and effectively listening. So this is important because research highlights that of our time spent communicating, 22% of it comes from reading, 23% comes from the spoken word, and over 55% of all of our communication comes from listening, right? So that shows you the importance and the value of listening. Over half of our communication, over half of our understanding of communication comes from actually listening. So our body language can often also be the clearest indicator if someone is actively listening. So we've talked before about how nonverbal communication can leak our true feelings, right? Our nonverbal communication can show us if someone is actively and effectively listening, or if they're just sort of zoning in and out and maybe hearing a little bit of what it is that we're talking about. Our best, one of the best ways that we can think about this in terms of nonverbals leaking our true feelings, as we've talked about in the past, is just to think about personal relationships, right? If this is your friend or this is your partner, and you were to ask them, what's wrong, right? Because you see something is wrong. And he says, nothing, I'm fine, right? Or if this is your friend or your partner, right? And you say, what's wrong? What did I do? What did I do, right? Common answer, a common question. Nothing. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Right? If you just listen to that, if you just listen to the spoken word of someone saying, I'm fine, nothing is wrong, then you're probably going to be in some trouble. Right? Because if you were a more effective listener, if you were able to look at everything, right, using your ears, your heart, right, your mind, your field of experiences, everything that has happened to you up until this point in time, you can, and your eyes, you can look at either of these people and realize that the spoken word, right, just hearing them say everything's fine, isn't completely true. And so I think this is a really good example of active, effective listening, right? And how it is so much more than just the spoken word. Words don't really convey meaning. It's the tone, it's the nonverbals, it's all of these other elements of that communication that convey the primary meaning that comes from that communication message. And we see that perfectly in this example of how being an effective, active listener is so much more than that. Same thing here, right? If these guys were to say, yeah, I'm really interested in your class, Dr. Curry. I really find the information interesting. And this is the feedback, right? If I close my eyes and I hear that, I might believe it. Right? But if I use the other organs of communication to be a more active, effective listener, I can tell very easily that the students are disinterested in the material. Right? So if this is a job interview and this guy's trying to sell himself, he is probably not doing a very good job if, as the interviewer, I'm paying attention to all of these other components of his communication. And it is clear that he's disinterested also. So why is this important? I love this quote by Taylor Caldwell. It says, the most desperate need of men today is not a new vaccine for any disease, or a new religion, or a new way of life. Man does not need to go to the moon or other solar systems. He does not require bigger and better bombs and missiles. His real need, his most terrible need, is for someone to listen to him, not as a patient, but as a human soul. I think that's a very impactful quote about listening, especially in our current times, in our society, where the need to listen and seek understanding among people is very important. I love this quote. That really sums up nicely why we need to be more active, effective listeners. Some other reasons of why effective listening is important. As I mentioned earlier, you probably don't listen as well as you think you do, and you probably don't know it. Research suggests that about 75% of people, when asked, are they a good listener, they say, yeah, I'm a great listener. But research really disputes that and says that people don't listen as well as they think they do. if we do practice effective listening, we are going to get a few things in terms of bettering our skills of communication. The first is we're going to get more information from the people that we're interacting with, right? If we are only focusing on the spoken word and what we hear, we're missing a lot of other key elements there that might be impactful or useful for us as we interact with them. If we're better listeners, we'll also increase other people's trust in us. We value people who are good listeners, right? Everyone has someone in their life that they turn to when they just need to talk to someone, right? And that's because we trust. We trust people more when people demonstrate that they are good listeners, that they listen to us. This is a no-brainer, but being a more effective listener is going to reduce conflict in our personal and professional lives. The better we listen, the more effective we listen, the better communicators we are, and naturally we're going to reduce conflict, both personally and professionally. We'll also better understand how to motivate other people, and that's important professionally, as right, we need to be able to understand the motivations of those around us and how we can motivate people to be more successful professionally, and how that might benefit us in terms of organizational communication. We will also inspire a higher level of commitment in the people around you. If you're a good listener, people are going to give that back to you, right? So their trust in you is going to be better. They're going to think more of you, and as a result of that, they're going to have a higher level of commitment towards you, regardless if that's a personal relationship, a friendship, or a professional relationship. People are going to respond better to you. They are going to support you more. They are going to give more back to you. Their willingness to help you is going to be higher if you are a good listener, because we value that in other people. Now, there's some reasons why we aren't better listeners, and they're pretty simple. Listening takes work. It's hard, right? We live in a day and age where we are always on, right? Our cell phones are, right? You probably heard a second ago my notification on my iPad, right? My iPad is laying beside me here as I prepare and present this lecture, and you can hear or probably heard it beep and go off with a notification, right? So we're living in a time where we are constantly being bombarded by all of these things around us, and so for us to actually listen effectively, right? For us to listen with all of these elements, all of these different organs, instead of just barely hearing what someone says. It takes work. It's hard, right? And that's the main reason why we're not better listeners. We're also not trained or taught to listen, right? Think about it. How many college classes have you ever had titled Listening 101, Effective Listening 202, right? They don't exist. We're not trained or taught to listen. We're taught math, arithmetic, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Those are the three basic elements that everyone is taught in grade school and in college, right? It's the foundation of most education systems. But we never have classes where we're taught how to listen, right? So it really is unfair, actually, when you think about it, to say, well, why aren't people better listeners? Well, how can we blame people for not being better listeners when we don't teach or train people to listen more effectively? We also have very short attention spans, and that ties into the fact that we're being bombarded by all of these other things around us. So for us to focus in and actually listen is difficult. The fourth element here is we don't have time, right? Based off all of those things we've discussed. And the last is that we have this urgency, right? We feel this urgency to express ourselves. And we have people in our lives who are worse at this than others, right? You all have that friend that whatever you say, they're going to tell you the same thing, right? You can tell them a story about the great trip that you just had this weekend, and their response is they're going to cut you off at some point and say, oh, well, I went to such and such this weekend too, or I've done that before, and let me tell you about it, right? So instead of listening to people, we feel this sense of urgency to express ourselves and our own experiences. And as a result of that, it damages our ability to be an effective listener. So those are the 5 reasons why we aren't better listeners. There's an interesting TED Talk here that I want to watch a few minutes of that talks about listening and the importance of being an effective listener.
We are losing our listening. We spend roughly 60% of our communication time listening, but we're not very good at it. We retain just 25% of what we hear. Now, not you, not this talk, but that is generally true. Let's define listening as making meaning from sound. It's a mental process, and it's a process of extraction. We use some pretty cool techniques to do this. One of them is pattern recognition. So in a cocktail party like this, if I say, David, Sarah, pay attention, some of you just sat up. We recognize patterns to distinguish noise from signal, and especially our name. Differencing is another technique we use. If I left this pink noise on for more than a couple of minutes, you would literally cease to hear it. We listen to differences, we discount sounds that remain the same. And then there is a whole range of filters. These filters take us from all sound down to what we pay attention to. Most people are entirely unconscious of these filters, but they actually create our reality in a way because they tell us what we're paying attention to right now. I'll give you one example of that. Intention is very important in sound, in listening. When I married my wife, I promised her that I would listen to her every day as if for the first time. Now that's something I fall short of on a daily basis. But it's a great intention to have in a relationship. But that's not all. Sound places us in space and in time. If you close your eyes right now in this room, you're aware of the size of the room from the reverberation and the bouncing of the sound off the surfaces. And you're aware of how many people are around you because of the micro noises you're receiving. And sound places us in time as well, because sound always has time embedded in it. In fact, I would suggest that our listening is the main way that we experience the flow of time from past to future. So, sonority is time and meaning, a great quote. I said at the beginning, we're losing our listening. Why did I say that? Well, there are a lot of reasons for this. First of all, we invented ways of recording. First writing, then audio recording, and now video recording as well. The premium on accurate and careful listening has simply disappeared. Secondly, the world is now so noisy, with this cacophony going on visually and auditorily, it's just hard to listen. It's tiring to listen. Many people take refuge in headphones, but they turn big public spaces like this, shared soundscapes, into millions of tiny little personal sound bubbles. In this scenario, nobody's listening to anybody. We're becoming impatient. We don't want oratory anymore, we want sound bites. And the art of conversation is being replaced, dangerously, I think, by personal broadcasting. I don't know how much listening there is in this conversation, which is sadly very common, especially in the UK. We're becoming desensitized. Our media have to scream at us with these kind of headlines in order to get our attention. And that means it's harder for us to pay attention to the quiet, the subtle, the understated. This is a serious problem that we're losing our listening. This is not trivial. Because listening is our access to understanding. Conscious listening always creates understanding. And only without conscious listening can these things happen. A world where we don't listen to each other at all is a very scary place indeed. So I'd like to share with you 5 simple exercises, tools you can take away with you to improve your own conscious listening. Would you like that? Good. The first one is silence. Just 3 minutes a day of silence is a wonderful exercise to reset your ears and to recalibrate so that you can hear the quiet again. If you can't get absolute silence, go for quiet. That's absolutely fine. Second, I call this the mixer. So even if you're in a noisy environment like this, and we all spend a lot of time in places like this, listen in the coffee bar to how many channels of sound can I hear? How many individual channels in that mix am I listening to? You can do it in a beautiful place as well, like a lake How many birds am I hearing? Where are they? Where are those ripples? It's a great exercise for improving the quality of your listening. Third, this exercise I call savoring, and this is a beautiful exercise. It's about enjoying mundane sounds. This, for example, is my tumble dryer. It's a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I love it.
Okay, so maybe the tumble dryer as a waltz is a little bit of a stretch, but I think the key tenets here of this TED Talk really highlight our understanding of listening and why it's important, and some aspects and elements of it that maybe we haven't thought about until now. So a few final thoughts and takeaways. If you are truly interested in getting information and solving problems, you'll ask questions. You will stop talking and you will listen. Right? That's probably the most impactful thought that we can have about listening. If you remember anything from this conversation and lecture, remember that if you are truly interested in getting information and solving problems, you will ask questions, you will stop talking, and you will listen. Right? That's where true meaning comes in. Good listening makes us more empathic. And empathy is one of the most valuable things that we can have in building relationships. No one wants to be friends. No one wants to be in a romantic relationship with someone who is only concerned about themselves, with someone who constantly talks about themselves. We want people who take a genuine interest in us, right? Someone who's a good listener. Are you an asshole, right? Someone who continually asks for advice and does nothing with it, right? So don't be that type of person who continues to ask the same question over and over and over again and then never does anything to change the outcome. Maybe you have some friends like that. They constantly ask you your advice about a specific topic, and then every time you turn around, you see them doing the complete opposite of what you advised them to do. And you're like, really? If you're going to do the complete opposite, then please don't come to me and ask me for advice. And lastly, I want to end with this quote again, right? About listening, especially in today's times. The most desperate need of men today is not a new vaccine or a new religion or a new way of life. It doesn't need to go to the moon or solar systems. It doesn't require bigger and better bombs and missiles. His real need, his most terrible need, is for someone to listen to him, not as a patient, but as a human soul. Become better listeners. Ask people questions, especially if you find yourself in unfamiliar times and you're trying to learn. Ask people, right? Don't assume that you can figure it out on your own. Ask people for help. Ask people for advice. Just become a better listener, and your communication skills will improve, and the types and qualities of relationships that you have will also improve as well.